Morning. This is going to be a strange one. So a while ago, when we did our bedroom and got rid of the old bed, I was left with some very old bedposts, and I basically sliced them on the miter saw like so and created what I thought at the time would be about 160 coasters. After I'd processed about 80 of them, I realised that the stop block had slipped and some were different heights. They were a bit small, they were just under 80 mil. And do they actually look that nice for a coaster? I don't know. I've still got a load that were finished that are knocking around, but I am left with about 80 that are still unfinished. So let me bring you in closer and I'll tell you what I'm going to do with these. Come on. I've got a piece of birch ply. It's a little bit rough and ready, and I used some of it to make a crosscut sled yesterday, but I'm left with this. It's not in the best shape, and I don't think I can make use of it as attractive birch ply. But because I've got all these slices of bedposts, my idea is to put them all together, try and find the ones that are of similar height, because I wouldn't really want to send this through the thicknesser anyway, but it's too wide for the thicknesser regardless. And the plan is just to build up with all these a little tabletop. Some of these are a bit gnarled. Do I leave in the character or not? I don't know. But the aim is, I think I need 6x5, which is 30. That's good maths. So if I can find 30 that are the same height, that's what I'm going to do. I don't even know if it'll look nice. So without further ado, let's crack on. So the initial task was finding all the ones from the huge pile that were of a similar depth, and I fiddled and farted around with them for quite a while, getting them to look as nice as they could. And once I got that, I was able to see how big the birch ply needed to be and trimmed that on the table saw. And because the underside of the birch ply could technically be seen if you got on your knees and had a peek, I just wanted to clean it up a bit. After putting in a couple of temporary sides to keep the coasters consistently tight, I was then able to glue them in. A bit of cling film, so these were left over from when I built the cabin, and I've got a new tool here because I'd had problems with my saw and fence being of equal distance, so that little gauge was very handy. And then I was able to cut these down to make the aprons. And here I am using offcuts of the same wood for the legs. And as I said, these were left over from when I built the cabin 4 years ago, and it's very tight grain, slow grown, decent quality, and they'd make great legs. So I cut them to length, and using my homemade tapering jig, I put a taper on one side and then give it a little turn and put it on the other side, so I've got it tapers in on two faces of the legs, just for a bit of interesting detail. Then a little bit of hand sanding on those edges,
and up to about 120, I think.
So here we are. I'm quite excited because I'm going to get all these weights off and see what it looks like. Well, it probably looked like it did before, but this time they'll be glued down, and then I can think about what to do next. So we'll get these off. You saw I've done all the legs. I've had an initial sanding up to 120 and a slight little taper on two sides, so they're all good and ready. These are probably going to be the apron for the table, and we'll fix into the legs. I don't know how, but I'll probably use dowels. But yeah, let's get these off. See what it looks like. So I'm hoping all these weights worked. And nothing stuck. So here we go. It's going to be quite an unusual looking table. Oh. All seems to be fairly solid. So I'm going to unscrew these two sides and tip it upside down and see if they fall off. Success.
So in my recently built crosscut sled, I secure this tabletop, ensure that the blade will clear it and trim off one side, and then send it through and trim off the other side. Do this on all four sides. And just break down the cuts with a little bit of sandpaper. Now the aim here is to pour some black epoxy all over the table. So I'm using this as a frame, some melamine, and I secure the bottom, or seal the bottom, with silicone, because I don't really want it leaking all over the table. I don't know how much epoxy I'll need, so I make up one of these cups initially, half and half, with a little bit of black dye. Get the mixing paddle on it, and initially I use the syringe to just put some in all the little nooks and crannies. But then I think, well, I just need full coverage really to make sure there's no gaps, so I do that. But then I'll make up another pot and ignore the intricacies of a little bit here and a little bit there, and pour the lot in. Then I'll cover it up because I don't want any dust getting on it, and leave that, I think, 1 or 2 days, and it was rock solid. Using masking tape on the flattest surface in the workshop, I turn my legs upside down. The blue note denotes the outside face because they have a taper on 2 sides, which are the insides. Then I cut the aprons, and this is how it will look. So I'll make a little jig here to make sure all my dowels are consistent and in the same spot, and using the drill press I put all the holes to receive the dowel in the legs. Now in the aprons you can't get that under the drill press, so I get the tried and tested method of a square before remembering I actually have a doweling jig, so I use that. Then I put the dowels in the aprons first, get them tapped in, and then line it all up for what is, I wouldn't say it was a stressful glue up, you know, it's not stress, is it? It's just a bit like panic stations, but trying to get them all in was a bit of a faff more than anything. It doesn't look like it when the footage is sped up, but in real time it's a bit of a faff. So I'll get that all in, check that it's all square, and then I'll flip it over and add some weights to make sure that it doesn't dry squift and that the legs are all flat to the flat surface. Then it was epoxy time, so off come the barrier. I'll put parcel tape on so nothing's stuck. Clear the silicone from the underneath, and then for a final time send it through the table saw just to get that crisp edge, because the aim is to put a trim round. So after knocking up a quick router sled, I router off the epoxy, and geez, did this stink. I had to light a joss stick, it was awful. The smell of that plastic epoxy chippings flying everywhere in the workshop was covered. So a bit of a clean up, and then I'll just give it a little initial sanding just to see how it's come out, and you'll see all the epoxy has filled every nook and cranny, well almost. It's a nice smooth finish. So back to the legs, they dried and the dowels had got a good firm fix. So I sanded those down, and then I set about cutting the trim. So setting my miter saw to 45, I just inch up until I've got all the miters cut, and using a ratchet strap and my parallel clamps, I glue the miters all in. I haven't got a pin nailer with long enough pins or nails, so it's just glue on this. So yet again, forcing it down onto the flat surface, and then it was on to giving the legs a quick coat of antique pine stain, because I thought that pine was a bit too bright. And when that was done and drying off, I could turn my attention to this. Now it's fairly flush, but it needed a bit of a sanding just to bring the mitered edges in with the tabletop. So that's what I did, and then I noticed a few little cracks, so I got the super glue with a little bit of black dye and filled in all the visible tiny little holes that I could see, sprayed on a bit of activator and sanded it all down. And I didn't capture it on tape, but I rounded all the edges off with a round over bit on the palm router, and then give it all a good sanding up to about 240. Then with the tabletop upturned and the legs in place and weighed down, so I didn't want it moving while I was putting the screws in, I drilled and screwed 8 screws through the apron, nice and countersunk into the top. Then, because it was a water-based antique pine varnish, I knocked the legs back with some 400 grit sandpaper before applying the same antique pine varnish to the top. Then I applied my homemade finish. Just to give it a nice smooth finish that I will later buff. Then I knocked back the finish on the tabletop and surround. As I said, it was water based, before applying my homemade finish once again. and then I'll come back and buff it to a beautiful shine. Here I am buffing that finish in, and after buffing the top you end up with a finish like this, which I'm really glad how it turned out in the end. And here's just a few shots. I know I need to iron that sheet or steam it, but you get the idea. And if you've made it this far, thank you very much for watching.